Welcome back to Culture Brief, a Denison Forum podcast where we navigate the constant stream of top stories and news, politics, sports, pop culture, technology, anything else, and we're doing it all from a Christian perspective. Hi, I'm Connor Jones, and Micah, what in the world were the Dallas Mavericks thinking?
This still hurts, man. This still hurts, but we'll have plenty of time to talk about it. My name is Micah Tomasella, and today we're talking about last week's plane crashes, Trump's tariff plan, the Super Bowl, and of course, the story that shook the sports world and really news in general over the weekend. We have an extra special guest on the podcast today to discuss the stunning and heart-wrenching Luka Dončić and Anthony Davis trade. Who do you think our special guest is, Connor?
Well, I don't feel like that's a fair question because I actually know who it is.
Well, you'll just have to wait and see.
Everyone else is going to have to guess and wait and see. But yeah, let's dive into it, Micah. We got a lot to cover this week, so let's go into the brief.
Let's jump into the brief.
Okay, well, we're going to have to start off with kind of the more tragic side of stories this week. Unfortunately, as everybody knows, there was a massive plane crash last week over the Potomac River in Washington, D.C., in which American Eagle Flight 5342 coming in from Wichita, Kansas, was in a collision with a U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter, and they both went crashing into the Potomac River. Very tragic, Micah. Unfortunately, all lives were lost. There were 64 people on board the American Eagle jet, three soldiers on board the Black Hawk. Micah, this was the first fatal U.S. airline crash since 2009. Just a really heart-wrenching images, very tragic stories, hearing the stories of people who are waiting for their family members at the airport and picking them up. The figure skating community has been hit hard. 28 of the people that were killed were part of the U.S. figure skating community, and the U.S. Figure Skating Federation said they were incredible athletes, caring in support of family members and coaches who worked tirelessly for their athletes. They were returning home from the U.S. Figure Skating Championships that were just held in Wichita, Kansas. And so they all had just been competing, or they were coaches and family members that were there for that competition. And on their way home, unfortunately, their lives were all cut short. I did include and will include a USA Today article in the show notes that gives the stories of each of the victims as far as they've been able to reach out to those families and whatnot. So they're updating that consistently. As a tribute to those people, I would just encourage going to read the stories of these children, competitors, family members. There were guys on a hunting trip. There were people on work trips, all of that. Just hearing their stories is very, very tragic, but it is a good tribute to them. Micah, this is just such a devastating tragedy. What do you think about all this? What was your first reaction when you saw the news? This was on Wednesday night last week.
Yeah, I mean, it was probably similar to everybody else's reaction. I mean, you start to get the alerts. I mean, Connor and I are news junkies. And so we get the alerts, we see them, and you just see that a plane went down with people on it. And you saw a crash, and you saw that a helicopter was involved, and you see the videos flooding, but you don't really know what's going to happen. And then fast forward, you start to figure out what happened, and you just figure out that just now, I think on Tuesday, they were able to recover all 67 bodies from the Potomac River. I mean, this plane was landing, like it was very close to the ground. It was landing, and then it had a collision with this Black Hawk helicopter, and tragically, just seemingly like a casual flight after a competition from Wichita, Kansas to Washington, D.C., so many people's lives were cut short. It's brutal, man. It's really sad. And I think a way that we can honor victims in this situation, just like you said, is read their stories and pray for their families. Yep. Tragedy can strike at any time. Life is fragile. Things can happen quickly. Things can be great, and then in the next minute they're awful. And so that's life. But this is hard to swallow for sure.
This one is hard to swallow. And like I said, we haven't had an accident in America since 2009. Plane crashes are fairly rare. They were more common in the 80s and 90s, but we've learned so much over time in the aviation industry that they've been pretty much prevented for so long. And this was obviously just in a way, a freak accident. A lot of things lined up. My initial reaction was the same. I was initially just like, what? When I got the first push notification that a plane crashed in the Potomac. That's already happened. That happened in 1982 with Air Florida Flight 90. And I don't know if you've ever seen those images, Micah, but that one crashed in the icy waters, I believe in January. It was December or January. and there were insane rescue footage and pictures of that rescue when I think there was like 5 survivors there. And so, we've seen similar images, and I was just like, this can't be possible. This doesn't happen anymore. And initially the reports were it was a small aircraft, and then as it came out that there was an American Eagle involved, it just was like, oh, the gut wrench. This was going to be more tragic than anybody thought.
It's brutal, and it's almost like you assume that as technology increases, these things should be happening less. I mean, people have been flying for a long time, right? So you're talking about that story from Florida in 1982, and then now fast forward to 2025, like you just think we would be done with these things. But Connor, tell us about. There's been so much backlash on this. There's been so much scrutiny on this. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, it is interesting. Because this happened in the nation's capital, I think we saw immediate response from national and global media. Think about the images we were seeing that night. You had the emergency lights, and you had the Capitol building dome in the background and the Washington Monument. It's just like was these iconic sites, and also right on the precipice of an insane week in D.C. already. And then you've got all the agencies around it, and you have all these new cabinet members. Pete Hegseth was just confirmed a few days before, and then the new Secretary of Transportation was confirmed the day before this crash, Sean Duffy. And so these 2 new secretaries are having to work on the investigation. So we do have the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, begun their investigation immediately. They're actually headquartered in Washington, D.C., so everyone was on scene very fast. They're already kind of releasing some information. Obviously, this is going to be a really long investigation. They'll probably take over a year to get the full report out, and then with that, they'll release suggested changes across the industry that need to be made. And so we'll see what comes out of that. But here's what we do know so far. Obviously, the nation's capital is a highly trafficked area for aircraft. This is because there are so many VIPs and senior government officials flying around D.C. in helicopters that it's just, there's congested air. If you've ever been to D.C., you will see aircraft landing at Reagan Airport just right over the city, and then you'll see helicopters flying around everywhere as well. So everybody already knows it's congested, but there's rules in place for those helicopters. They're supposed to follow very specific paths and stay at very specific altitudes. This chopper should not have been above 200 feet. It does sound like it might have been in the 300-foot range based off of preliminary data. The pilots of the helicopter were wearing night vision goggles, but for some reason, they didn't see the aircraft. There's limited visibility in these aircraft cockpits. So maybe that makes some sense, but we'll just have to find out more. Here's the kicker. The air traffic control tower. Normally, there are 2 people in the spot who would, one person be focused on helicopters, one person focused on planes in this area until 9:30 p.m. At 9 p.m. is when this accident happened. And the air traffic control supervisor had sent home one of those other controllers. So one controller was watching both helicopters and planes about 30 minutes earlier than normal while there's still a lot of air traffic going on. So something will probably come out of that information. And then the controller did ask the Black Hawk if they saw the American Eagle jet, and the Black Hawk said yes. But investigators are trying to determine if the Black Hawk pilots thought it might have been a different jet that they were seeing. And
right, because there was another jet in the area, right?
Yeah, because there was a line of jets coming into land. I mean, that's when you see at an airport, you see the line of jets just back and forth behind each other, going in and out of the airports, all of that. And then this is interesting. Politico noted last week in an article that the pandemic did worsen staffing shortages of air traffic controllers, which led to some pretty bad stats over the last few years. In 2022, there were 5 near miss collisions. In 2023, there were 11. And that really sparked a lot of fear in the aviation industry. And the FAA did work pretty hard to put new protections in place. So last year in 2024, there was only 1 recorded near miss of commercial airliners. That's still bad. You don't want any. But all of those near misses, everybody's been kind of raising the alarm like, hey, someday this is going to end up happening. Something needs to change with air traffic controllers or technology that's supposed to prevent collisions, all of that. So it all came to a head last week. And it's also on the heels of just several other tragic crashes. There was one in Azerbaijan Airlines in December on Christmas Day that killed 38 people. And that was actually hit by a Russian missile. And there's a lot more to that story. Then on December 29th in South Korea, a Jeju Airlines Boeing 737 crashed into a wall after it had engine failure. That killed 179 people. You remember that one? Yeah, and the videos of both of those accidents were really hard to watch. And then even this last week, just a few days after this crash in D.C., on Friday night, a Learjet took off from Northeast Philadelphia. It was a Mexican Learjet, and it was an air transport for medical reasons. Took off, and within 60 seconds, nosedived right into a city block. It killed all 6 people on board that aircraft, including a child patient and her mother. And then one person on the ground was also killed. Many, many people were injured. The city block was just destroyed. Fireball took out a lot, caused tons of damage. It was really hard to see those videos as well. Micah, it's just not normal to have so many tragic and very visible plane crashes in such a short span. It's putting a lot of emphasis, obviously, on the needed safety measures. And we're going to see pressure on plane manufacturers, government officials, military people, all across the globe. But Micah, just what do you think? What do you think this requires us to respond as Christians? Like, how do we go to God in a situation like this and say, God, you're such a good God, but how can you allow tragedy like this plane crash in DC or any of these plane crashes or any other tragedies?
Yeah, I think about just the raw emotion of that, and, you hear about this plane crash and the 67 people who passed away, and then just a few days later, everybody's getting alerts. Just a couple days later, everybody's getting alerts about this crash in Philadelphia, and you learn about that story. And that child was being flown in from Mexico to get life-saving surgery, and then flying back after that surgery was completed.
Yeah.
And then the plane crashed, and they passed away. So I think about something that Dr. Denison, our founder, noted in response to the crash last week in one of his articles, that if we are to blame God for all innocent suffering, mustn't we also credit him for all the innocent good? A very relatable quote from C.S. Lewis. Following his wife's death to bone cancer, he says, "Not that I think, in much danger of ceasing to believe in God. The real danger is of coming to believe such dreadful things about him. The conclusion I dread is not, so there's no God after all, but so this is what God's really like. Deceive yourself no longer." So we do worship a good God, and we can lament in hard moments. Psalm 30, 6-7, David says, "As for me, I said in my prosperity, I shall never be moved by your favor. O Lord, you have made my mountain stand strong. You hid your face, and I was dismayed." It's tough, Connor. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that C.S. Lewis quote is so good because it's just like we could take this moment and be like, our God is not a good God, but that's not the case. Our faith, there's the opportunity to waver here, or there's an opportunity to look back at God. And like Dr. Denison said in his article, if we credit God for all the innocent suffering, we also have to credit him for all the innocent good. We don't deserve anything. That's ultimately what it comes down to. Now, that's really, not something that people suffering in these tragedies or any sort of trial like to hear. But it is reality. God is a good God, and we can't explain everything that happens. It's really hard to go through a trial, to go through a tragedy. But God can and will redeem everything. So somewhere there will be, down the line, we'll hear stories of redemption in these tragedies. But you were right earlier on saying we need to pray for these families who are going through this right now. In these plane crashes, or anyone just going through suffering. If it's the LA wildfires or other natural disasters or cancer, whatever it is, we pray for those people and ask God to step in and bring them peace and comfort. But yeah, thank you, Micah, for kind of hitting on those encouraging notes. Anyways, pray for these people as they walk through the days of grief and mourning. But that's kind of a wrap up on the plane crashes. It's hard to talk about, but let's Micah, let's go into your section on tariffs.
Let's talk about tariffs. Such an exciting topic, tariffs is. So we've heard about tariffs a lot in the news for a couple of years now. Trump ran on this. He ran his campaign on it, and we're seeing it be implemented now. So I put my thinking cap on for you guys, and I do it for the Culture Brief audience. I do it for you, Connor, right? So that I can catch you up on all things tariffs and how they affect us as everyday Americans. So let me define a tariff before I... Oh, of course. Anything for you, buddy. So let me define a tariff for a second here before we even start this conversation. I think there's a lot of confusion around what this means. We just keep hearing the word tariff. It's such a buzzword right now. Tariffs are taxes imposed by one country on goods imported from another country. It's as simple as that. So over the last week, the United States has introduced bold new tariff measures, signaling a strong push for economic fairness, domestic job growth, and national security. That's what Trump's saying the reasons are for these tariffs. These tariffs are championed, obviously, by President Donald Trump, and they align with his longstanding commitment and plan. He's talked about tariffs a lot. He had levels of tariffs in his first term, but during the second term, he has cranked up the heat for sure. And so here are the tariffs implemented so far this past week. So China. So as of February 4th, the U.S. has imposed a 10% tariff on Chinese imports, including products that were previously exempt. This move also, for example, it requires formal customs entry for mail packages from China, adding another layer of regulation. Initially, a 25% tariff on imports from these neighboring countries, Canada and Mexico, was scheduled to take effect on February 1st. Mm-hmm. However, following negotiations, the tariffs have been postponed for 30 days, contingent upon Canada and Mexico enhancing border security efforts to curb drug trafficking. So we hear this, we hear it's about to go in. There is a tight network of importation, deportation in North America, right? So this would really disrupt things. And so in the 11th hour, Trump negotiates with the president of Mexico, negotiates with the prime minister of Canada, and in the 11th hour, he delays them 30 days. And really, that all hinged upon drugs, drug cartels, the movement of fentanyl.
Right.
The goal was to get them to start putting in more effort to border security. Now, it can be argued what they were already doing. There's a lot of conflicting reports out there, and I can go ahead and tell you, even as somebody who's doing this day in and day out and recording this podcast, Connor, it is, and we can talk about this more in the future, it's hard to find the truth on something. It really is. Like on a topic like this and the effects of it, it's hard to find the truth out there to see through the bias on a topic like this. Have you noticed that?
No, it definitely is. Yeah. Well, you and I were texting this week about these tariffs, and we're like, okay, so Canada, they agreed. Well, Mexico did it first, and then Canada followed. They agreed to some of Trump's demands on the border, and they said, we're going to do this and this and this and implement these military motives. And Canada was like, we're going to appoint a fentanyl border czar type of person in their government. And then, people are like, this is amazing. Trump has, shown the strength of America and his strength, and he's negotiating well.
Everyone's caving.
Everyone's caving. But then other people came out and were like, yeah, maybe they caved, but they were already planning on doing this. So it's hard to know.
Or they had already done it.
They'd already done it. People were like, it's not as big of a win as you think. It is hard to know. This is part of discernment, right? Is like going through and not just listening to one side and trying to land on what is the truth. And we do hope to help bring that truth here on this podcast. That's part of why Mike and I are diving into news every day. We want to help you discern that. And honestly, we're still trying to figure this one out because there's just so many questionable reports and it depends on who's talking. If you're the Canadian government, you want to look like you're stronger. And so you're saying, yeah, we were already doing this. We just wanted to appease Trump. And Mexico may say the same thing. If you're in the White House, you're saying Trump won. He showed the strength of America. And he's using tariffs as leverage, like he did last week with Colombia. And we talked about that too. He's figured out a way to negotiate with tariffs as the leverage here, but each side's going to try to come off as they negotiated and they won the negotiation.
Right. I mean, and that's a great point, Connor, that you just kind of drawed upon, because it was really just what we were talking about with the plane crashes. We're not going to sit here in every single episode and give you a for sure answer unless we have one. We're discussing things right now, doing our best to stay in the loop ourselves and to inform our audience and do it from a biblical perspective, do it in a fun way, even when we're having to cover hard things. But I mean, ultimately, it's difficult for us to be able to look at this situation and say, I have the exact answer. So thank you for bearing with us. But it's just important that, people say you got to stay informed. Well, I'm sitting here saying, you got to read a lot and you still might not feel as informed as you'd like to. But let's talk about the consequences and the reaction of these tariffs across the globe. So let's talk about China's retaliation. So in response to the new tariffs, China swiftly countered with its own set of retaliatory tariffs on U.S. imports. So, they targeted industries such as coal, liquefied natural gas, crude oil, automobiles, and agricultural machinery. I've been reading about this quite a bit. They did retaliate, but they could have retaliated a lot more. And I think that's because the president of China is seeking to negotiate something from this. And so in the coming days, we'll see what comes from this. And if I had to guess personally, I'm not sure if this tariff is going to stand for a long time. I just think that there's some things being played out right now. There's some different dominoes that need to fall. Secondly,
Definitely.
we saw some market volatility. So just for fun, watch the stock market for a few hours. If you just have an extra few hours,
Yeah, that's fun.
While it's open,
that's so fun.
Whenever stuff like this happens, it just dive bombs. And then an agreement is announced. Trump tweets something, puts it out on Truth Social. You start to see stocks go up. I mean, it's crazy what the president of the United States, mere words, has on things like stocks and what they're valued at, right? But the tariff announcement initially sent shockwaves through the financial markets. The Dow Jones saw a sharp decline, but then following these agreements, you saw them kind of tick back up. You saw that there was an automotive industry impact. There's a cryptocurrency market decline that you're kind of seeing it go back up as well. But ultimately, it's either going to work out, these tariffs, or it's not going to work out. It's going to have some consequences. It might be a little bit of both. I think when we read bias from both sides, you kind of have to take pieces of both, and that's how you kind of find the truth in it. But here's what I do know. God is in control. In situations like this, I have a tendency to worry about how this impacts the economy, how it'll impact my family, etc. It's the definition of a situation that we cannot control. And personally, I don't know about you, I don't like those situations. But I'd like to give you a verse, and I'd like to give you a quote from the modern prophet Dave Ramsey. I don't know if you've ever heard of him before. Which one do you want first, Connor?
Does Dave Ramsey's quote come in an envelope because he had to make you cut up the plastic card for it? And
which one do you want first?
I want the Dave Ramsey quote.
Okay. What happens in your house is more important than what happens in the White House. He says that all the time. He's been saying it for years. What you can control is more important than all of the things that are outside of your control. And the things that are outside of your control, we have to trust God that he's in control. And I'll give you this verse, Philippians 4:6-7. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. So let's focus on what we can control and trust God that he is faithful to handle the rest.
Amen to that. Yeah, I'm fully there with you. I don't know what else is going to happen with tariffs, but we do know God's got everything in control, and we're grateful
So there's
for that.
tariffs with Micah. All right, well, let's jump into our third story. Let's talk this Mavs trade. And you know what, guys? Connor, I think it's time to bring in our special guest. What do you think?
Let's do it. Bring him in.
Okay. So here's our special guest. Let's bring him in. His name is Dr. Ryan Denison.
Woo!
You hear me clapping?
Dr.
Yippee,
Denison,
yippee.
welcome.
Yep.
Thank you.
Dr. Ryan Denison is the senior editor for theology at Denison Forum. He's a brilliant guy, has all these degrees and all these very intense subjects, but he's here today to talk to you about the implication of this Mavs trade. Ryan, how are you today, man?
Honestly, I'm still a little sports sad, but I appreciate the chance to process that grief with y'all. So I think it's going to help.
Yeah. You know what? I'm glad that you called it. I'm glad that you called it sports sad. I am still, it truly has been a gut-wrenching situation. So let me lay out the trade, and then Ryan would love to get your thoughts on it. So we have brought Ryan in to discuss the Luka Dončić, Anthony Davis swap between the Dallas Mavericks and the Los Angeles Lakers. Ryan's a huge Mavs fan, just like me, and this was gut-wrenching. This hurts even now, just a few days later. So here's what happened. The Dallas Mavericks shocked the NBA, shocked the world by trading Luka Dončić, really known as a top 3 player in the world, to the Lakers for Anthony Davis in a blockbuster deal this past weekend. The trade, which also involved other players and picks, immediately got backlash. It was highly controversial from the start. Here are the key controversies, but there are a lot. I'm just going to give you a few. First of all, Dončić was blindsided. Luka reportedly found out after the trade happened and after it was finalized, sparking criticism of Mavericks GM Nico Harrison. He's the one that pulled all of the strings on this. Luka was with the Mavericks for 7 years, drafted and developed, accomplished so much, and he wasn't even given an opportunity before the trade was even finalized to have a conversation. You saw backlash from his dad, who came out and said certain things. Mavs, the front office and their decision-making has come under scrutiny, still under scrutiny. Many questioned why Dallas moved a young superstar, and I'm going to point this out, a 25-year-old traded him for a 31-year-old, almost 32-year-old, injury-prone, who's a star himself in his own right. I'm not saying that. But you swapped players who are 7 years in age difference, and in the NBA and professional sports, age really does matter. And then the missed trade opportunities. Reports suggested Dallas could have gotten a better deal from the Lakers, but settled for less. So all of that to say, this divided fans and analysts mostly going on one side. This one stings, and it feels wrong for so many reasons. And there's a ton I could say. I'm having to stop myself here. But Ryan, what are your thoughts and feelings on how it all went down, man?
Well, what just separates it from so many of the other trades we've seen recently is that Luka didn't want out. And I was starting to get over the sports side elements of it. And then I made the mistake of watching the clips from his introductory press conference with the Lakers. And he just looked pained to be there.
I couldn't watch it, Ryan.
It was hard.
I still haven't watched it.
It was hard because he was asked questions and he gave all the right answers, handled it really well. But at the end of the day, it was still clear that he didn't want to leave. And it was hard because, and then to know that he was there, and especially in an age where it seems so often like loyalty is sort of a one-way street. Like as fans, our commitment to the team lasts beyond the season, lasts beyond most of the players. I mean, I can remember back when Dirk and Steve Nash and Michael Finley were my source of hope for the Mavs. And now all of them have kids that are like, a lot of them have kids that are starting to play basketball and stuff like that. It's like, but I'm still a fan. Like my fandom will extend beyond the Luka, will extend well beyond the reign of Nico Harrison, it seems like. And that's one of the things that came out is it's even if they win a championship with this core, if the trade turns out to be the missing piece to get them over that hump, the long-term ramifications are still going to be hard to take because we're going to have to watch Luka play for other teams for the rest of his career.
The Lakers.
This isn't just any other team. This is
golly.
Yeah, it's going to be rough. And Nico Harrison even joked about how in his press conference talking about how this was a deal he made for the next few years and how he and the head coach Jason Kidd weren't going to be around for all those years where it was going to get rough and
very tone deaf.
Very much
because
so.
we're going to be around. Very tone
100%.
deaf.
And it just made me angry all over again. It's like every time I think I'm over it, just something else comes up and it's like, nope, right back to being upset that this happened, and ways that it elicits emotions sports probably shouldn't if I was a more emotionally mature person.
Yeah.
And I'm not.
Yeah.
I still just get angry.
Well, you weren't alone, Ryan. I mean, to clarify, the three of us are Mavs fans. I'm very casual. Micah and Ryan are just dedicated Mavs fans. They watch all the games, but we're all Dallas boys, right? So, but we would talk about this even if we weren't Dallas fans because this was so shocking. So, Ryan, you're not alone in that. First off, the sports world was just, shocked. My wife, who doesn't watch basketball, woke up the morning after, and I told her that Luka got traded. And she was like, I'm sorry, what? Because even she knows. And I was at church the next day. We were talking to a whole bunch of couples, right? And all the wives who normally don't talk about sports with us were all standing in the circle with me and the guys. And they're like, yeah, what happened here? Like, we know Luka because the city is dedicated to Luka. And Luka was dedicated to the city. So there is a mourning process here. There's a devotion that was broken, a loyalty that was broken here on both sides. And the fans feel betrayed. Luka feels betrayed. It's sad. And it is so significant that the whole NBA was just shocked. And it came in at like midnight on a Saturday night. This was like just out of left field. So we would talk about this anyways because it's such a big deal. But for the three of us and for you two in particular, this is just, Ryan, I can see it on your face. Listeners can't, but I can see the pain on your face.
Yeah.
I know you're heartbroken.
It was going to be rough. And Luka had his frustrating elements of it. I mean, he wasn't a perfect player.
Yes.
And I can intellectually grasp why they would be a little hesitant to give him that Supermax contract. Making the highest paid player in basketball, all that. It doesn't change the fact that they're not going to get another player of his caliber anytime soon. And it's going to make basketball less fun for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. Would you have been opposed to a trade at all, Ryan, if they got the right return and did it at the right time and not gone behind Luka's back?
I feel like there was a way to do it that maybe could have ended better. But at the end of the day, it still kind of comes back. And that's part of what was so frustrating with it is it just comes back to this idea that as fans, we're committed to the team for a lot longer than the people who make the decisions about that team.
Right.
And but I'll be honest, as soon as I started feeling that way, and really started kind of getting into my feelings about it and all that, I felt like God kind of hit me upside the head and was like, well, it's not that different from the way you treat me sometimes. And that was a little convicting because there are times where I felt like God reminded me of it, where there's times where I take a much shorter view of my life than he does. And it was kind of, if I'm grateful for anything from this trade, it's that God kind of used it to remind me that, when I go through hard times initially or up front, if God leads me through that, then it's because he has a better plan for the long term. And because God is interested in a relationship that lasts for eternity, not just one that lasts for today. And it's really hard for me to take that larger view sometimes. And so while I'm grateful for that revelation, it's been convicting the last few days as I've tried to process that alongside of it. And I think that's part of God's redemption of it, maybe, is that it's helped me have a better appreciation of our relationship. But I still miss Luka, and I still wish he was a Maverick. So that part's not getting easier. But
that's good. That's good. Thank you for giving us some conviction and some hope in that, Ryan. I mean, I had similar thoughts, but I appreciate you sharing that as we're processing. I mean, ultimately, jokes aside, we're all going to be okay. If you're worried about us, Ryan and I are going to be fine. I would check in on the kids in DFW, though. I mean, if you just want to look up and see some kids crying, I mean, the amount of videos I've seen of parents telling their kids that Luka, in DFW, that Luka Dončić was traded, and they're bawling their eyes out.
Well, one of our coworkers, we were on a meeting yesterday. One of our coworkers showed us a picture of her son who just got a Luka jersey for Christmas. And when she told him the news, she took a picture, and he was not well. I feel bad for these kids, man.
Yeah.
It's brutal. Ryan, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us. We hope to have you and future guests on the podcast. But Dr. Ryan Denison, thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing today.
Thank you for helping me process my grief a little bit with y'all. I feel better.
It was a pleasure, brother. Thank you.
Micah, let's hit on something real fast that we talked about last week. So we mentioned last week on our hot take / mailbag section, which, by the way, you can email us your thoughts on this stuff at culturebrief@denisonforum.org.
Please
email us about any of the topics we just discussed, or about a hot take or something you want to talk about.
It shapes what we talk about.
If you want to mourn the Mavs trade, or if you want to celebrate the Mavs trade, shoot us that email. We want to hit.
Who's going to do that? A Lakers fan?
Lakers fans.
I guess a Lakers fan. Yeah.
If you're a Lakers fan, dude, you're like, yes, we're set for the next decade. But let's talk about what we discussed last week on subtitles. So last week, we debated if we should have subtitles on the television. I said no, and I still feel right in my answer. You said, yes, subtitles are so necessary on TV. And I do feel let down by the world because we got a lot of responses. We put up some polls. We got comments on Instagram and Facebook because I put a clip up on our socials of us in that debate. And on our polls,
I want to hear you read them off. I want to hear you read them off.
Spotify poll, we did put a poll on Spotify. 82% said yes, they do use subtitles. 18% said no. That is not good for me.
Brutal.
Ryan S. left a comment on Spotify. He said, if you don't watch shows with subtitles, you're not a true fan. Wow. Thank you for that comment, Ryan, but I don't know if I agree.
Like fan of your TV itself, or fan of the show you're watching?
Like, I guess I'm not a fan of the show because I don't watch it with subtitles. I don't know. Yeah. And then we put up a poll on Instagram, and 78% of you guys said that you do watch TV with subtitles, and only 22% said no. Now, I will say, several of those people who said no left comments and were like, yeah, absolutely not. Why would I ever do that? And in fact, I wanted to point out that our friend Steph Thurling, she's the podcast host of the Christian Parenting Podcast, and she does have multiple children. She said subtitles are like reading glasses. Resist until you absolutely have to have them 100%. And she said she should have done it a few years ago, but she simply cannot. I agree with that. If you don't need them, don't use them. You know, it's like reading glasses.
And I think we're forced into this position, like pro subtitle people. I'm very casual about it, but I think that there's a little bit of an arrogance coming from those, and a little bit of a high and mighty attitude coming from those that don't use subtitles. So then we're forced into our corner, and we have to defend ourselves, And so it seems like we did. But Connor, did you see this poll from the Flyover? And admittedly, the Flyover is going to get a lot more votes, and that did cast more of a balanced shadow on this topic. So the Flyover is a great newsletter. that you can subscribe to that comes to your email inbox every morning. It's a great way that Connor and I stay informed. It just hits all the biggest topics and gives you some context. But they put a poll the day after our podcast release, by the way.
Yeah, so if you're the writer of the flyover, are you listening to us?
Hit us
Let
up,
us know.
man. Hit us up, because that seems like random timing. But the flyover, their question was, do you watch TV with the subtitles on? Which might have been our exact title.
I literally...
It was released, our podcast was released last Thursday, and this was on the day after that Friday's flyover, and we were both like, what? So anyway, the poll results were 51% yes with subtitles, 49% no subtitles. So that
it's a tie.
That did cast a more balanced shadow on this whole thing, and we'll see what comes from it. Ultimately, I think that we can agree to disagree and still love each other as brothers in Christ. What do you say, Connor?
Yeah, it's not that big of a deal to ruin a friendship. Anyways, let us know your thoughts on that or anything else at culturebrief@denisonforum.org.
Let us know. It's time to talk about what's coming up, what's coming down the pike. We always want to do this because we record weekly, so we do want to kind of give you an idea of what's coming up. And news is ever evolving, right? So we just want to hit some highlights of some things that are coming up. So here's what's happening. There are upcoming Trump cabinet confirmation votes. It's looking like more like Tulsi Gabbard will get confirmed as the Director of National Intelligence, RFK Jr. as Secretary of Health and Human Services, and Kash Patel as FBI Director. Those will all be close. I think the votes are going to be along party lines here, but even if they are along party lines, with the Senate having the majority, with the Republicans having the majority in the Senate, all three of these people should be confirmed, and we should know that before we record the next episode. And then, the next steps of the Israel-Gaza ceasefire. So Benjamin Netanyahu was in America meeting with Trump this week, and he's the leader of Israel. Trump said in a press conference on Tuesday that the U.S. could take over Gaza, and he did not decline the possibility of using U.S. troops to make it happen. He said he thinks it could be the Riviera of the Middle East, and this is going to be something that reverberates across the world. And Dr. Jim Denison, our founder, wrote a special edition article with many details on this, and we are going to link that in the show notes here. But Connor, talk to me just a little bit about that.
Yeah, man, that shocked the world when in this press conference with Netanyahu, everybody was like, I'm sorry, what? Because everyone knows that there has to be a plan set for Gaza and what's going to happen with the people, the 2 million people that live there, and the strip of land. That's
and there's so many countries in the area that are refusing to take it over, right? So it's been in limbo since
Jordan
the ceasefire.
And Egypt.
Right.
Yeah, Saudi Arabia, all of them don't want to really take it over or let the people move into their land. But also the Palestinians say, hey, this is where we live. We want to stay here. And so when Trump said this and was like, hey, the U.S. might just take it over, people are like, who gave you the right to do that? How's that going to happen? And some people are saying this is just a bluff. He's just trying to, negotiate. We know he's the art of the deal guy. It's what we talked about with tariffs.
I guess we'll see, right?
So we'll see if he's negotiating or if he's very serious about this. He is a real estate guy. And so some people think that he's being serious. Like, hey, demolish everything and build resorts. It's seaside location. I don't know. We'll just see. Either way, what Trump and his team know is that chaos is not an accident. This is out of Axios this week. They just were really talking about how the team is strategically knowing that the tsunami of ideas and executive orders and news stories and press conferences is overwhelming the media and overwhelming specifically their opponents and the Democrats. No one knows how to respond to all these stories. I mean, every day it's something about Elon Musk. It's something about Greenland, tariffs, trade wars, US aid that just got shut down over the weekend, or Ukraine, South Africa, TikTok, whatever it is every day, which is why in this tune-in section we're saying, just keep your ears peeled, your eyes open, because it's going to be something daily, essentially, out of this administration. And so, there's a lot to take in there, Micah, but we'll stay tuned on that. We may come back to it next week. Before we close out this episode, we have got to talk about the big thing this weekend. What is that, Micah?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. Maybe the Super Bowl. Yes, the Super Bowl is this Sunday, February 9th. The Kansas City Chiefs are taking on the Philadelphia Eagles in New Orleans at the Superdome at 6:30 Eastern Time, 5:30 Central Standard Time. Trump will be in attendance. First time a sitting president has ever been in attendance at the Super Bowl.
If I'm the president, and I can go to anything I want, I'd be at the Super Bowl every stinking year.
That surprised me too.
Yeah, I can't believe a president's never been.
Yeah. This is 39 days after the New Year's Day terrorist attack on Bourbon Street. The halftime show is being performed by Kendrick Lamar. He has some special guests there. There's going to be a lot of great commercials. I hope they're better than how they've been the last few years. It seems like we've kind of gotten away from the heyday of amazing commercials, but we'll see.
Yep.
Connor, let's talk about predictions and current favorites for MVP for the leagues. So let me ask you, who's going to be the MVP in the NFL this year, which is a regular season award, by the way. That's what I want to clarify. The MVP is awarded to the best regular season performance. And then who's going to win the Super Bowl, man?
Okay. Well, first off, my Super Bowl prediction, I think the Chiefs are going to win. I just think they're going to do this three-peat thing. They tend to just pull off these games. I don't know. I'm not saying I want them to win, although I really dislike the Eagles. Yep. And so I don't like either of these teams that much. I'd rather someone else be in the Super Bowl, preferably the Cowboys, but that's a long time from now. And so I do think the Chiefs will win. They're just that team. They pull it off every time. Mahomes is probably going to be the Super Bowl MVP. And I do think the league MVP is going to be Josh Allen. What are you thinking?
Well, unfortunately, I wish we would have talked about this beforehand. I think we're going to have the exact same predictions.
Oh, really?
I refuse. Like, I'll be honest, I'm not going to be impartial here. I will never pick the Philadelphia Eagles to win a game or win anything. I refuse. I'm a diehard Dallas Cowboys fan. Cut me open. I bleed silver and blue, no matter how bad or good it is. Mostly, it's just been bad to be a Dallas Cowboys fan recently. But you cannot root for the Philadelphia Eagles. They'll just be able to hang that over our heads. Let's witness history. Let's witness the first three-peat in the Super Bowl era. The Kansas City Chiefs winning again. Patrick Mahomes is undeniable. He's amazing. I think we're seeing the GOAT in the making. I said that before. I think that we're witnessing something we've never really seen before, and so that's always exciting. I think Patrick Mahomes will also be the Super Bowl MVP, and I do think Josh Allen is going to win, and I'll tell you why. The regular season award aspect of it, I did clarify that, but the people who vote for this, you've got to believe that there's a little bit of the playoff performance that kind of goes into their mind. Josh Allen beat Lamar Jackson in the playoffs, okay? Mm-hmm. And so I do think that plays in effect, even in just their psyche as they're casting their vote. I think it'll be close between Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. Josh Allen's the quarterback for the Buffalo Bills. Lamar Jackson is the quarterback for the Baltimore Ravens. I think Josh Allen wins the league MVP just by a little bit, and the Chiefs win, and Patrick Mahomes is the MVP. I'm sorry for copying literally everything you just said.
Well, I feel like it's a solid prediction, but what if we're completely wrong? And we could be. Hey, how many times do you think they're going to show Taylor Swift on the screen?
18.
I feel like
I think they're going to show her
18.
so many times. I think they're going to show her too many times.
Yeah.
Too many
probably.
times. Yeah.
And
yeah.
we'll see we'll see about the commercials.
Yeah, we'll see. All right. Well, hey, guys, thank you so much for joining us for this week's episode of the Culture Brief, a Denison Forum podcast. All articles and videos mentioned will be linked in the show notes. If you enjoyed today's show and episode, please like, subscribe, rate, and review the show. Wherever you consume podcasts, you'll see an opportunity to be able to rate it. Give us those 5 stars. It helps us grow the show. Look beneath where you consume your podcasts, where you could see polls or you can leave comments. That helps us formulate our next show every single week. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next Thursday.